All right. I think it's good for us to get started, and if anyone joins, they will join us. Um, Welcome, everyone, and hello. Thank you for joining today's webinar about evolving e-commerce expectations in Europe. This is a collaboration between accessiBe, which is a web accessibility company, and you'll learn more about what that means, and PrestaShop. And we're really excited to have you here, and we're excited for this partnership and collaboration. So you'll learn more about how these two are connected. If you are joining now, feel free to enter into the chat where where you're joining from. We're excited to see all of the different countries in Europe represented and to share a little bit more insight about how you can approach the European Accessibility Act expectations and regulation. So, Krystian, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, sure. So, hello everybody. My name is Krystian Podemski. I'm a Tech Evangelist at PrestaShop, which means that I work closely with our developers, agencies, merchants, and my role is basically to connect PrestaShop with its community, explaining technical direction, showing updates, channeling feedback back to the company. Shortly about PrestaShop. PrestaShop is an open source e-commerce platform powering more than 200,000 online stores worldwide, mostly small and medium businesses, which is why this Accessibility Act is quite important for the merchants in our ecosystem. And I'm very happy to be here today to talk about accessibility in e-commerce, what it really means for merchants. And I'm proud that PrestaShop is partnering with accessibility on this important topic.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone, and nice to meet you. My name is Superior Den. I am the brand and community lead at accessiBe. I've been here for about 4.5 years. And what I've come to learn in my time at the company is that accessibility is no longer just a best practice. It's part of how you create operational infrastructure, especially in the e-commerce space. And we've been seeing this more and more with regulation and enforcement around the world. But specifically for Europe, the enforcement started in the past year. And so we have a really interesting conversation that will really focus in on what this means for you as PrestaShop merchants or organizations looking to work with PrestaShop, and how to best prepare yourself for the digital commerce future. So for today's agenda, what we're going to cover is a little bit of background about the EAA, which is the European Accessibility Act. This will give you a little bit of context and understanding. Feel free as we go along to share your questions in the chat or the Q&A function. We'll then have a conversation about what this means for e-commerce. And this will be an interesting conversation between myself and Krystian, where stores face exposure for digital accessibility risks, how the enforcement itself works, what to look out for, and then we'll close out with best practices and answer any questions that remain at the end of the session. So to get us started, the European Accessibility Act is a law that came into effect in June 2025, and it basically requires certain products and services to be accessible to people with disabilities. By saying things need to be accessible for people with disabilities, we actually mean it needs to be accessible for everyone. People with disabilities are the largest minority group in the world, but they also represent a very large purchasing power of the market. And by not making things accessible to them, you actually are abstaining from opportunities to expand your market, to see how you can improve the actual usability of your products. So the effort around the EAA isn't just saying, hey, you need to be accessible for the sake of being accessible. It's also making sure that all of your users can browse, buy, and manage accounts without any barriers. So who does this apply to? Well, funny enough, you don't have to be based in the EU for this to be to qualify for you. If you sell goods or services to consumers in the EU, you do need to be accessible according to the EAA. You need to operate, also if you operate any digital services used in the buying process. So think about any integrations that you might have on your website, as well as meeting the basic size thresholds. So we'll talk a little bit about who doesn't need to qualify for the EAA particularly, but what best practices they can already be taking, because this is the direction that the market is going in. This is an interesting slide from accessiBe's research over the past year because, as I mentioned, the EAA already went into effect. And when we surveyed 300 e-commerce leaders around the world a few months ago, 71% of them told us that they sell to the EU. However, 85% were not prepared for the EAA, meaning the majority of the people that we had interviewed about EAA had not already begun their enforcement process. And that's a reality that we're seeing with most e-commerce teams. There are these obligations that also have massive benefits for your business, which we'll talk about in a moment. But by not having the accessibility standards, you're basically opening yourself up to exposure and possible enforcement risks. So, what does this mean for e-commerce? And this is where I think Krystian and I can have an interesting conversation about this, and we welcome your questions as well. So, the first part we talked about, it's pretty obvious: compliance. Every business wants to comply with the law. No one wants to do something inappropriate against the law, or also or also create a risk for their own business. But where that comes in to play is actually with cart abandonment and discoverability. Some of the other parts of the research that we had done had found that most businesses in the e-commerce space have not conducted an audit of their checkout flow in the past year. So if you're not auditing yourself, if you're not checking what you're actually the processes on your own website, you're opening yourself up to risk of people not completing that checkout flow and leaving carts. And that is about a $260 million market right there. The other thing is discoverability. And Krystian, I know you had a question about this before, and I actually want to pose it to you. Like, what do you think about when you think about accessibility and discoverability? What comes to mind?
You mean in e-commerce area in when shopping and when purchasing goods online?
Yeah,
So basically, I would like to get back to this, compliance word because in the past, in the few years, or in EU generally speaking, compliance is, this word that people most of the time hate because, they have to care about GDPR, about this and that. But let's be honest, those all compliance rules, regulations are here for a reason. And GDPR helps us with the privacy. There are some, compliance regulations where you have to make sure that pricing on your shop is correctly, presented on your product pages and so on. And I feel like it's yet another chance to make the internet better with accessibility because let's be honest, it doesn't only help people with disabilities to purchase on the website. It's also about having a better structure on the website, having a clearer structure of the categories, a better menu, a better navigation through the store. There are so many aspects that you can improve only by taking a step back and trying to see how your store looks like for example, people with disabilities. Like it's a great occasion to understand your business and your customers better. So yeah, that's how I see it. I see it as a chance and not as a, some yet another regulation that we need to follow.
I totally agree with you on that. And the funny thing about it is that when you actually do that effort of making your website more accessible, you will see improvements on the checkout flow. You will see improvements in how people navigate the website. And that's where it comes into the discoverability space. So with AI and LLMs coming into play and everyone trying to get at the top of the ChatGPT list, what we're seeing is that if you structure your content on your website in an accessible manner, meaning you use the proper heading structures and you use the proper font sizes and you add the proper alt text or alternative text to all of your images, and there's a proper flow of how a user can navigate through the website. It's not only about the user navigating the website, it's also about the machines
The
navigating the
machine.
website.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
by having an accessible website, you're actually improving your discoverability, what we like to call AEO, like search engine optimization, but answer engine optimization.
Yeah, totally. And what is worth adding is that I think we will be living in times where people with disabilities probably could also purchase through some third-party platforms like those chats, AI chats, and so on. So by making your website, your store more accessible, more discoverable, it's making a better for your business. It's basically doing better for your business. So it's definitely worth pursuing this chance to make your website better.
Agreed. And I think at this point, accessibility is just becoming the cost of doing business. Similar to the what you mentioned before about GDPR, security and privacy wasn't necessarily the top of mind
Yeah.
15 years ago, but now you can't even start working if you don't have the proper SSL certificates. So same goes here for accessibility. That is the direction that we're moving in, but you by getting started sooner, you can only benefit from it. And one more point that I want to share here is that the disability community is one of the most brand loyal communities, meaning if they have a good experience, they will return to have that experience. But if they have an experience in which they feel excluded, like they can't complete a purchase on a website because they can't actually reach navigation buttons or they don't understand the content of your website, they most likely won't return and they might even tell their friends and family about it. So it is a good practice to start bringing that in, and we'll talk about what those good practices are. But before we get into that, what does all of this mean for PrestaShop merchants, Krystian?
EEA is makes accessibility a legal requirement for online merchants in the EU, but not only in EU, because if you, as Sapir said, that if you sell to EU, you are basically also required to comply with EEA. So, as a PrestaShop, we try to provide an accessibility-aware technical foundation. And one great example of it is that in PrestaShop 9.1, the upcoming version, we have this new storefront called Hummingbird, where we made sure to apply, for example, WCAG standards. And in general, it's like 93% compliant with EAA. So we work on standards in the core platform, but eventually compliance is not automatic. Like it's not that you install PrestaShop and you are automatically compliant with EEA. You need help from third-party partners. You sometimes need an audit because a store includes a themes, modules, some payment integrations, some custom scripts. We talked about it, when we prepared the webinar, that even situation when the merchant changes, the banners on their store, slides and basically promo content, it might impact your accessibility in the store. The color of the buttons, the popular page builders that are, very easy to use, but you can basically push the boundaries of accessibility in the wrong way. So each of these choices can either support accessibility or even unintentionally create barriers. So, like I said, we often see redesigns or feature updates introduced without accessibility awareness. We see that this can create serious issues for users relying on, for example, screen readers. So it definitely impacts PrestaShop merchants and merchants around the world. And as PrestaShop, we try to provide a foundation to later work on it with partners like you, like accessiBe and developers in our ecosystem to make things better.
We also had a separate conversation when we were preparing about my experience building a website. Do you remember? And
Yeah.
how and I think this might be relevant for the audience as well. You mentioned changing banners and buttons, and all of that is true. But if you have a lot of users that have admin abilities on your website and they're also doing A/B testing or adding new product elements to the website, all of that can contribute to something becoming less accessible. So if you start with a really accessible theme and you had the core work, but then you keep building upon that and you don't stop to actually audit, review, and remediate, you're going to end up with a lot of mess at the end. So it's a good thing to have in the back of your mind as you're working towards it. Just like we said, the cost of doing business is just this is another element, another layer of the work that you need to be doing is thinking about user experience for everyone, which is, of course, accessibility.
Definitely. It's a continuous aspect, like continuous job to make your store accessible. Like with every change, you have to make sure that everything is positive for accessibility, is accessible.
Totally. So we talked a little bit about the compliance background and what this means for e-commerce and what this means for PrestaShop merchants. But some of you might be very, very new to the accessibility space and joining because you heard rumblings about what EAA is, but not quite sure how it actually impacts your business. So these are some of the common ways that we'll see digital experiences break. And we can talk about some of these and give you a little bit of context into what that actually means. But these are just common elements that appear on an e-commerce website. What we've seen is that if you're changing navigation, so that can be like the structure of the web page. That's what Krystian was referring to now with the banners or buttons, moving location. I had access to a drag and drop website. So I was moving headers and footers and content boxes all over the place. And now think about a user who isn't using a mouse, but they might be using another assistive tool like their keyboard to navigate the website. And if you don't have the proper flow, what's going to happen is that the keyboard navigation is going to take them from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, back to the top, to the left, to the right, skip an image, jump to a button. They won't have they won't be able to reach the areas of the website that they really want to interact with. So it's not that they don't want to be a customer on your website, it's that they don't have the possibility to navigate. And that's a big issue. So that's why we put that one as number one. Anything you want to share on that, Krystian?
Yeah, well, I would like to sum up it in, if users cannot reach out to products, then conversion even never even starts. So, and it's again not only about users with disabilities. Like we use forms as well on the web. Like we use to tap through fields. And if you don't have this implemented correctly, you instead of tabbing through fields, you tap no, who knows where. And it's very frustrating even for users without disabilities. So, or if you tap through the form and you want to click space to check, for example, a remember me button, and it doesn't work. Like it's very frustrating. So again, by improving accessibility, we are automatically improving user experience and comfort of users using our website, no matter whether they are, with disabilities or not. And it should basically motivate merchants to even more to put some effort into that.
That is such a good point. It makes me think about all the times where I've tried creating a password and it tells me that the password isn't accepted, but I actually don't get any feedback about why not. So, when
Yeah.
you are trying to put in any sort of detail and it tells you that it's incorrect and it gives you guidance on how you can improve that. That's also an accessibility feature, by the way. So, if
Yeah.
I put in my email address at Gmail, but I forget the .com, it will tell me that that's not a real email address. But if it doesn't tell me that I did something wrong, I might think to myself, well, I put at Gmail. What did I do wrong? So these are the small little things that can have big implications in terms of conversion. I agree with that. That was such a good point. Another thing that we've noticed is that if users are navigating and menus aren't accessible, then assistive technologies might have an issue with being able to access drop downs. So let's say you have a mega menu and you have all of these different elements, but you have also tabs underneath that. If an assistive technology can't reach those pages, meaning the user who's trying to navigate without the help of a mouse, or someone who's using a screen reader because they cannot see and they need it described to them, if they skip those elements, that also impacts the conversion rate. Something that I think is the most interesting area of web accessibility, or at least to me, because I'm a nerd, but images is something that comes up a lot. And so when we think about images for accessibility, I've had a lot of conversations with clients in the past who said, well, blind people aren't shopping on my website. And that's just purely not true. They might be. And there's also a spectrum of vision that someone might have. You can see both me and Krystian are wearing our glasses today. So we do need to have visibility. But when alt text is added to an image, meaning on the back end of an image, when you're adding a description of what's happening in that image, it helps the user with the screen reader understand anything that they might not be able to visibly see. Another reason that this is important, I have three total. Another reason is that this is important is because if a website doesn't load properly for any sort of reason, and you don't have an alt text, it won't show any background information. But if it doesn't show, then you can also have the alt text there to describe that particular image. And then the last reason, and the best one probably for today's conversation, is again talking back about that SEO and AEO and having a visible difference in that background data, basically playing towards the benefit of your website.
Yeah. What
Um,
else to add? Everything's connected. Everything's connected, and I noted a few points because images are particularly interesting. Because let's imagine that someone uses a screen reader, and the image and the screen reader says that you want to buy image 1234.jpg, for example. Like it doesn't make any sense, and how frustrating it must be for people, trying to purchase something on your website. And this SEO aspect you mentioned, yet again confirms that it's not that you are forced to make your store accessible. You're forced to make your store better in each aspect, in user experience, in SEO, in AEO, in GEO. So there's so much good that you can do by, like I said, taking a step back and making your store accessible.
That was such a good point about the image 1234 because I've definitely been on websites that are not accessible that have buttons that aren't properly described in the code as buttons. And what happens is it just says link,
Yeah.
link, link, but you don't
Yeah,
know where
click,
you're
link,
linking
view.
to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, view, click, link. Yeah. That's the common issue. And fortunately, from the developer's perspective, sometimes even when you code the website, AI tools nowadays they basically suggest you to add the alternative text tag or title tag to the buttons. So AI definitely helps with that. Even on the coding. Side of things, but it must be definitely a pain as well for people with disabilities to interact with such websites. And yeah, it's definitely something to improve, and hopefully we'll change that thanks to education to merchants about this issue.
I think once people realize the level of knowledge that they can gain and the benefit that they can gain, especially when it comes to checkout processes, because ultimately this is an e-commerce conversation we're having today for merchants. We want you to be able to sell more. And so by making these improvements, you'll be able to also see the results in the conversion. Okay. What are some other common sources of exposure? And I think these are relevant more to the PrestaShop ecosystem. So, Krystian, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So non-compliant themes, I think it's pretty much straightforward. So whenever you try to buy a new look of the storefront or your store, you should make sure that it is accessible. And in PrestaShop world, we make sure to provide you with the foundation that developers will build on top of. But it's definitely something you should be aware of because it's not often that you have, time and money and resources to invest in a fully dedicated storefront to your shop. So definitely keep an eye on that. When it comes to third-party modules and providers, it's a proof of, I would say, shared responsibility. That it's not only on the shoulders of the merchants, it's also on the shoulders of your business partners, tech partners, to make sure that their solutions are accessible. So if you use a third-party module or some service provider that's their solution is not accessible, reach out to them and ensure that they are aware of this and basically try to convince them that them changing their solution would be beneficial for both them and their clients. Custom JavaScript, well, I can think of some dynamic interactions which are totally incompatible with screen readers. I can think of some wrong implementation of captchas on the forms, some dynamic forms which basically, for instance, we have this field dependency mechanism. So you click a button and then another field pops up on the form. And very often those are not accessible and it's something to look out for. Too many authorized users. I think this is an interesting example, and you took on that, Sapir, already. That very often when you manage the website, you have some, more users with the access to your back office, to your administration area of the store, and they keep adding new content, new banners, new elements to the website, and if there's if there is a lack of documentation, if there is no process on how to ensure that those new elements are accessible, then you end up having a website that is not accessible, even though a week before it could be. It could have been. So as you can see, if you have no trusted, employees, if you have no trusted coworkers available, if you have no documentation for them, it's very difficult to ensure that your store keeps being accessible over time. And it also proves that it's a continuous effort, that if you want to make sure that your store keeps being accessible, you have to have regular audits, regular scans, regular checkups, whether that's the case or not. And that's how I see it.
Couldn't have said it better. So this is how EA enforcement might start, and this is sort of how the ball starts rolling. It's typically complaint driven, meaning that someone will encounter an accessibility barrier on your website, and then they might submit a complaint to the national authority. That leads to a formal notice. Authorities will then review that specific user journey and determine whether it meets accessibility requirements in practice. Most countries around the world and most legal authorities will refer back to the WCAG 2.1 AA, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines at the 2.1 AA level. accessiBe adheres to the 2.2 AA level, so that's a good thing to note. And then the next thing after that with enforcement is that they would require some sort of remediation or proof of action if they do confirm that you have a barrier. So by getting ahead of barriers and having that documentation that Krystian mentioned, you're already setting yourself up for success. And then you're reducing the risk of exposure and you're reducing the risk of having to deal with any sort of enforcement and fines. Why are we mentioning this? Because fines can actually reach up to 500,000 euros. In Germany, already in the past year, so in the past less than 12 months that the EAA has been in effect, there has already been a fine for, it says dollars here, but it should be 150,000 euros for missing alt text in the checkout flow. So it's something that I implore you to test out already when you're off the call today is to audit your checkout flow to get the ball rolling. Test it out yourself without the use of your screen and just with a keyboard or vice versa. How would you navigate this website and what are some of the elements that you can already start improving? The Digital Trust Index in Europe actually did a scan of homepage compliance. So they looked at over nearly 250,000 or more than 250,000 websites and found that 93% of them fail at already on their homepage. So if there's an issue on the homepage, you can imagine what's going on the rest of the website. And that's why we need to take action already today.
Yep. I will start on this one because I'm sure that people might wondering on who should be responsible for accessibility, and it basically depends on your structure. I believe that it should be embedded into how your business operate, and it shouldn't be treated as a one-time project. Like we mentioned, it's like privacy or security, because accessibility requires continuous attention, and having the right expertise because becomes essential. So there it is, accessibility. So Sapir, off to you. If you could
Thank you.
mention more
Yes.
about accessibility.
Yes. So I've been with accessiBe for quite a while now, and we started out with having a product which already is available in the PrestaShop marketplace, which is our Access widget. And this is a AI-powered solution that helps remediate accessibility on the spot. And it helps users make the modifications that are going to be accessible for them. But over the course of our time in the accessibility space and with new AI innovations, we've been able to actually expand to a platform of different solutions. So we also have developer tools to help you, to help developers address accessibility at the source code level in advance. And we also have services to help you if you need to conduct particular audits or user testing on your website before you launch a new web page, before you get started with your website, or starting a new domain. So we do have a platform of different solutions that we'll be happy to share with you after the call. But what I wanted to touch on in this conversation today is how AI can help you with continuous effort, but it also does require that sort of human touch. So, with AI powered automation, our Access widget can scan the website every 24 hours and make the remediations that are needed on an ongoing basis. And you'll also receive proper reports on a monthly basis. And you can also request more frequently to learn about all of the changes that have been implemented on your website. So, you have that as an added benefit, but you can also involve manual testing and customer mediation, which is basically expert testing from our professional services team. It's trained developers who will go through your website and identify specific barriers that might still exist if they are under complex user journeys. So if you have particular integrations that might be difficult, or any sort of areas where there's a need for additional support and review, that is where our team will really come in handy. And it's something that I definitely recommend people to take advantage of as you're thinking about accessibility. We don't expect every single business to have 100% knowledge in accessibility. Most developers actually don't. And that's the result of why there's so many websites without accessibility today. When these regulations started, or when these documentations about how to create an accessible website started, it was far beyond or far before websites were so commonplace. And we're only just evolving, and all of these websites are becoming more dynamic and more complex, and we're involving more AI. And we need to have that sort of human touch to make sure it works for everyone. So that's a little bit about our product ecosystem and some of the things that we wanted to share with you today to help you get started. You can already visit the PrestaShop app place and start your trial of Access Widget to learn more. But really, the next steps for you will be these accessible foundations, third-party oversight, and starting to audit yourself. Krystian, did you want to take this also?
Yeah, with a pleasure. Because for PrestaShop merchants, readiness starts. I believe that readiness starts with a good foundation. With when they choose a good foundation. So at PrestaShop, we're trying our best to provide it, and it's also the case that we try to find the right partners to help merchants in our ecosystem to be to have their stores accessible. So I can recommend to search for the solutions to that are accessible. And I want to emphasize on this, thing that it is a continuous effort. It's like security, it's like privacy, it's a continuous effort. So audit yourself regularly. It's a not one-time project. And if you are serious about this subject, you should definitely regularly review third-party modules, custom code, because it may introduce barriers, even if you don't have to, even if you didn't want to. And it's importance about having a right documentation for your employees, for your coworkers, dealing with the content on your website. It all is connected to how your website will be accessible. And it's not only about accessibility, it's about your business and user experience. It's about SEO, AI discoverability, and all the things that we mentioned today. Those are important aspects that will make sure, if improved, will make your business better.
All about performance. That was such a great close. So before we end today's session and we jump into Q&A, feel free to add your questions already in the chat. But we wanted to share with you this very non-exhaustive but quick checklist of best practices for accessibility. And it's basically a summary of our conversation today to audit your critical flows, make sure that your product search effort and your checkout flows are navigable with assistive technology, to simplify the checkout process so everyone can purchase from your business. Label everything. You don't want buttons that just say button, 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 or images that say image, 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 especially if you're putting important information into those links and images. Design for clarity. Make sure that everything makes sense to every user. that your website not might not be a one size fits all. You might not be trying to target everyone, but your content should be easily understood by everyone. And I think that's an important clarification. And the way to do that is by leveraging feedback. Share it with an accessibility provider, share it with your colleagues, ask people with disabilities from the community to test your website. And I think that will be good to set you up for success and readiness for the EAA now and for years to come, because this is the direction that we're all going in. So
Well said.
thank you. Thank you so much. While we're waiting for any questions, I guess, Krystian, I want to ask you, what is one thing that you want people to walk away from today's session with? Like if you could say, oh, I really hope that they remember this one
Hmm.
thing from our webinar.
Okay, so I would like them to think about accessibility as not yet another regulation that comes, from EU or whoever, and rather as a chance to make both their business better and the internet better. Like it really is a chance to improve so many aspects of using websites in the internet that we shouldn't think about, it being just yet another regulation. Uh, it's rather a chance to improve things. That's how I see it. Plus, uh, I will emphasize on it yet again. It's not a one-time project. It's a continuous effort, and it should be just bundled, embedded into how business operates in the e-commerce area. Not only in the e-commerce area. Let's be honest. Accessibility should be a standard everywhere on the internet.
Totally agree. One of the reasons that e-commerce has been continuously targeted in the US and now it's such a topic for the EU is because it's transaction based. And it's also e-commerce websites are frequently changing. So if you're affected by seasonality or product availability, all of that can impact what you have on your website and therefore how you're communicating out what is on your website. I mentioned earlier that I would talk about if there are any exemptions to the EAA, and I realized I did not mention that, so I wanted to call back to that again. If you are a micro enterprise, meaning your business has fewer than 10 employees or under $2 million in annual turnover, there might be an exemption for your case. But based on today's conversation, and as you see, Krystian and I have done our research on this, this is a direction that we're all going in. And so you're already setting yourself up for success if you're starting to do these best practices today. Okay. I don't think we have any more questions unless someone else wants to share something right now. But with that being said, Krystian, I had such a good time talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to everyone here who attended. We'll share the recording after the webinar and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Sapir. Have a great day, everyone. See you.
Bye.
Bye.